Well, ladies and gentlemen, in this video, we are going to be discussing the test runs, or the dry runs, if you will, in relation to September 11th with the 9/11 hijackers, because obviously they didn't just walk onto the planes on September 11th not knowing anything about how they worked. They had several different dry runs which have been reported. Now, me personally, I would hypothesize that we really don't know how many dry runs they had, because I'm sure there were other ones that were happening that people didn't report, but there were two pretty prominent figures that were involved in this situation. The more famous situation involved actor James Woods, but I am first going to be talking about Rob Lowe. He apparently flew on a 9/11 hijackers dry run flight. He says, quote, "I flew with the 9/11 hijackers on a dry run without realizing, and I was shooting the West Wing in DC." So he was flying from DC to Los Angeles. He says, quote, "It was 11 days before 9/11. I made the flight a lot, and I didn't think anything of it. I got on the flight and it was packed, small plane. Looked around the cabin, didn't remember anything in particular. Nobody looked scary. Nobody looked like a terrorist. It looked like an absolute normal flight." So that is what he said 11 days before September 11th. And I would imagine that the way these hijackers behaved on these dry run flights varied considerably. You probably had several times where they just sat in their seats and did nothing and kind of looked normal, and that was possibly one of these flights. And then you had the James Woods situation. James Woods reported suspicious passengers to the FBI who ended up being some of the hijackers. The incident happened in late August. James Woods was on a flight from Boston to LA. He saw four men of apparent Middle Eastern origin acting very oddly, and he reported them to the flight attendants and the authorities on the ground when he landed. So that is pretty crazy. He had to have been shaken up, and there were some details that emerged from ABC News that reported some of the hijackers that were not named flew from Las Vegas to New York on August 1st, so that's a little over a month before 9/11, aboard US Airways, and one successfully asked for a tour of the cockpit, claiming to be a student pilot. In other flights designed to test airline security, some of the hijackers were seen videotaping in-flight procedures, according to reports. So, yeah, they were doing a bunch of different stuff, I'm sure. Getting a tour of the cockpit, I mean, I guess you wouldn't think anything of it, but it is a weird behavior. James Woods talks about details of the hijackers during the dry run flight. During the entire cross-country flight, none of them had anything to eat or drink, nor did they read or sleep. They only sat upright in their seats, occasionally conversing with each other in low tones. Woods mentioned what he had noticed to a flight attendant who shrugged it off. Arriving in Los Angeles, Woods told airport authorities, but they seemed unwilling to become involved. And of course, they would not think, oh, these guys are terrorists, they're horrible. They would say, oh, James Woods is just being paranoid, whatever. But that is pretty crazy. You're on a flight and you see four dudes acting real strange. There's really nothing you can do. I mean, you're going to be overwhelmed with paranoia. And again, if you're on a flight in a confined space, you are pretty much powerless in a situation like that. And obviously, they had to have been doing some pretty crazy stuff to report it about a little over a month away from September 11th. Now, there were also reports of some of the hijackers going to the airport just to look at the security, which obviously is extremely peculiar, but it didn't raise enough suspicion. There's little inklings where you can tell these guys were suspicious, but it's like you don't want to be the token person to profile people. There was also the training, which happened down in Florida. And one of the main instructors that trained Muhammad Atta, unfortunately, passed away a few weeks ago, but he talked about it and said the two hijackers that he trained, they were completely normal, and one of them was Atta, the main ringleader behind the actual attacks, and he said nothing was suspicious. I will say I have read in a few different places that during the training, people observed, I guess maybe one of the instructors, that some of the hijackers, which obviously they didn't know that at the point, some of the students, They didn't really care about knowing how to land the plane. They were not interested in that. They're interested more in the controls and setting like navigation. And there also is that rumor that maybe Muhammad Atta visited the Second World Trade Center to set some type of device so he would know exactly where he was going to possibly hit one of the Twin Towers, because I'm sure that's what they were most worried about. Obviously, landing doesn't matter. Now, when it comes to the Pentagon, that is a hard target to hit. It's because it's very low to the ground. But with the Twin Towers, you would not really be worried about having to descend very much at all, considering how tall the towers were. It's just a matter of sinking it to where one of the planes hits one, the other plane hits the other. Imagine if they both hit the same one. I mean, obviously it would be terrible. And I will say, if only one of the towers was hit and fell, the other tower would be completely fine. There would be some damage to it. There are very rare photographs of what the North Tower looked like after the South Tower fell. And there were a lot of windows blown out, like around the tridents. And also there was some seemingly like discoloration along the one wall, but it was pretty much completely fine in terms of another tower collapsing right next to it. The Marriott, that was the big issue. It got basically cut in half. So basically the main hijackers that were learning how to fly, it would have been 4 of them because there were 4 different units. They cared about specific things in particular when it came to the flight school, specifically things that they needed to know in order to hit their targets. Big on navigation and big on the controls, and also being able to position the plane properly, have it descend at a certain angle. There was not much in the way of landing or anything like that, but it is crazy to think about. James Woods actually traveled with the hijackers and talked to authorities about being worried about what's going on, and you would think if they would look into that, there could potentially be something they would find. You go on a bit of a paper trail, and the whole thing gets blown up. There have also been the reports that the Saudi embassy may have funded a 9/11 dry run. It alleges that the embassy paid for 2 Saudi nationalists to fly from Phoenix to Washington 2 years before the planes hit the World Trade Center. Saudi Arabia has always denied any involvement in 9/11, but the evidence could further reinforce the claim that employees and agents of Saudi Arabia directed and supported the hijackers. Those news articles in specific came out in 2016 or 2017, but obviously the theories about their involvement date back to the day of 9/11. A lot has been made and questioned about the pilots, specifically the ability to crash a plane into a Pentagon. And people say, well, that's ridiculous. There's no way you could do it. For me, I just lack perspective on flying a plane in general. Now, obviously, you don't compare it to driving a car, but I do feel like once you get the controls down, it is relatively easy. They're not going to make it hard, especially, as technology gets better. I guess this was back in 2001, but that is something to where people wonder, how did he manage to, legitimately fly it basically directly into the Pentagon without really hitting the ground? It's crazy. I'm sure you guys have seen the surveillance still frame. The plane looks like it's about to take off. You can see the tip of the plane, and then that is an airplane. I know people want to deny it. It's an airplane, but it looks like it's taking off. It's very close to the ground. The 2 that hit the Twin Towers, those were certainly easier targets, but the South Tower, I mean, they almost missed the South Tower. Imagine if a wing had just clipped the South Tower. The wing might have broken off of the plane and been stuck in the building, and then the plane would have crashed somewhere, possibly in a surrounding building, if that actually did end up happening. But either way, guys, that is going to do it for this video.